All right, so today is Friday, November 3rd, 2023. My name is Emily Ma, and I'm here with Dr. Cin-Ty Lee on behalf of the Houston Asian American Archive. And as a side note, this is not a standard oral history interview, which Dr. Lee has done with us before, but it is actually part of a separate project I'm doing on Chinese American immigrant parents expressing love to their children. So to start off, could you please state your full name and then when and where you were born?
Yeah, Cin-Ty Lee, and I was born in Taiwan, 1974.
And can you kind of describe the household that you grew up in and your relationship with your parents?
Um, yeah, it's a bit hard to describe because it's going back so far in time. Uh, it's really hard to pinpoint to describe it, but I guess, well, my parents, well, my dad was a professor at UC Riverside, just starting back in the 70s. And as an immigrant, and not at that time, not many immigrants around. So you can kind of imagine trying to get tenure when English is not your first language and you have nobody to give you advice. So he was pretty stressed. And at the same time, my mother was working in the city hall in Riverside, California, and they needed, of course, two salaries to support the family. But of course, that meant they were quite busy. And I think my dad would go. Well, this is what I was told, but he would have to go back into the office all the time to study or to do whatever he was doing, the work. And so we ended up moving out far from the universities. It was like at that time, it felt far, 30-minute drive, but long enough that it was my mom's choice, long enough that he couldn't go back to work after dinner. And so that sort of kept him at home. That was intentional. We later learned was probably a good thing. But we grew up in the countryside outside of the city, and we had a property. I mean, it was like a farm area, and I think it was like 5 acres, and in a place that people didn't really want to live. But we had an orange grove, so I grew up on that, pretty isolated from the rest of the world. There were no other kids to play with there, and of course, we were the only Asians. Well, there weren't many Asians anyway, but when you get out into the countryside, even fewer. I think it was a singularity. We're the only ones. So that's kind of how what I remember the most. And they were trying to take care of have the jaws, but they also had these orange trees. I don't know how many oranges we had, 500 orange trees, and they are immigrants just trying to make a living. And we grew the oranges and tried to sell them to make just a little extra money. So I remember tending the orange trees a lot. So that was a weird upbringing there.
Was that like a fond memory? Like, do you remember tending to the orange trees with your parents?
It was a fond memory, not so much the orange trees. Actually, I think being out in the countryside, there wasn't anything to do, so I would just wander around. But I do remember that my dad would point out various features in around the area. For example, if there was I remember there was some. It had rained, and the rain had eroded the soil a little bit and generated some interesting formations. And he would point those sorts of things out to me. And as a little kid, I would look at those, and I do remember at a very young age the power of looking at your surroundings. And so my dad kind of did a lot of that. I don't think it was very deliberate. It was just, as a matter of fact, just look at this, look at that. And of course, we, like many Asian families, I don't know about yours, and I don't know these days, but there was always the push to do well at school, and as well as play piano or play violin or something like that. So yeah, I played the piano, I played the viola, pretty stereotypical Asian American at the time. I didn't really enjoy those things, and I actually was not very good at school. I think I had um, a very tough time in math and things like that. Which is ironic because I'm actually quite good at that now. That's what I do a lot of that. But when I was young, I had a lot of tough times. So I think my mom, when I was young, I remember her being very strict and making sure that I learned these things. I was falling behind in classes a lot, actually, and this was at the age of 8 or something like that. But and I just learned it in a different way. So she in the background would help me learn how to do multiplication and all the basic arithmetic and algebra. And I didn't enjoy it at the time, of course, but when I look back, of course, had she not done that, the falling behind would not have been a great thing when you're an immigrant. You have really nothing else to go on, right? No, you don't really have the friends, you don't have the support group, you're not really good at anything else. So you had to have something that you could just stay with the crowd somehow. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think academics is a really big, like, common focus for a lot of Asian families. I know, like, for me, my dad would also kind of like sit me down and walk me through a lot of math problems. Do you have any like specific memories of when your mom would do that with you, like, that you recall?
Yeah, when it came to math, it was actually all with my mom. Uh, it wasn't, it was basic stuff like just how to multiply, how to tell time with the hands, not the digital, of course. Um, I don't really remember much about the details of what she taught me. I just remember that for me it was a lot of repetition. I had to repeat a lot, and that's mainly what she did. And had I not repeated, because by nature I'm a sort of lazy guy, and like to play. So I think she taught me some discipline, which I think is necessary for everybody. You have to have some discipline. So that was good. Of course, you only really appreciate that when you can look back. So
Yeah, and then I also wanted to ask, were the ways that your parents expressed love to you different between them? Like, did your dad express love one way and your mom express love another way, or what do you think about that?
I don't know. Sometimes I don't try. I don't think I've ever really thought about that deeply. Um, I think my dad was much more of a passive type, as never really trying to push me to excel or do anything. Not really sure why. but he would show me things. Uh, yeah, I think actually when I was young, when I became more of a teenager, I felt that perhaps uh, I felt that well, it's hard for me to describe this, but that the pressure to excel was not so much for me, but for them or my mom. Uh, uh, you know, I've talked to other Asian uh, Americans, and a lot of them have that same sort of experience. Uh, so you grew up having a little bit of a complex, I suppose. Um, but you know, again, when I look back, uh, everyone's trying to survive, and as when you're a parent, I'm a parent now, I have an 8-year-old kid, and uh, you never really trained to be a parent. You don't know what it means. I'll take it this: when you're actually as a professor, we get grad students, right? We work with them, and you want your grad students to do well, of course, but there's a little bit of when they do well, you feel proud, and how much is what you're doing is for yourself, how much of it really is for the grad student, right? And when I was a kid, I felt a lot of it was for the parents, not for me, and I felt that's what it was, some complex that they had, and I can't blame them uh, at all. Um, we really aren't in full control, none of us. And very few people are self-aware and can really control who they are. How you behave is imprinted on you from your parents, and they were imprinted from their parents. And you repeat the same sorts of things. This is what culture is. You repeat it. And interesting enough, when I was uh, first had my first few grad students, I found myself actually being a little bit like my parents, at least before I had kids. I'm actually glad I had grad students before I had kid, which is that you have to be able to separate that when they fail, you have to allow them to fail. It's not a failure on you, the parent. Uh, their success is not your success either. You got to kind of let them do it themselves. And this is not anything specific to Asian parents. It's all parents. I see like parent, typical American with their kids in sports, right? They put so much pressure on, say, sports, and the kid is not pulling through. The parents get mad, or so that sort of puts a lot of stress. So I think this is across the board, um, and I think after several grad students, I started to realize, oh, really, I'm being like a parent, and you just let them. They just kind of have to fumble their way through, and you have to be okay with them failing. And I think my parents, when they had us, they were younger, but as they grew older, I think they too, although I don't think they ever looked inward, didn't have the luxury of looking inward. That's a luxury of this young generation. Maybe I'm the first generation that has the privilege of thinking about that there's psychology, but the early generation that doesn't come, it doesn't exist. So, but they somehow, as they grow older, start to understand, even if they don't know it, how better to parent, how to let their children be free, and the fact that so I do a lot with birds. I guess you know that, and uh, I think somewhere around 10, I got really into birds, and my parents having zero experience in that, of course. or particularly my mom, she decided to help me facilitate that. When I look back, despite how strict she was, uh, when I wanted to go to this class uh, on birds that it was only for adults, she went out of her way to try to beg the teacher there. It was a night class at extension school to let this. Can you let this little kid come if I come too? And it must have been the most boring thing for her, but I it's what I wanted to do, and it was a weird thing, and so we would drive. I think it was like once a week in the night, about uh, like 40 minutes to this museum, uh, and there was a guy there um, who had a bunch of dead birds. He was a scientist, and he would sit there and teach me how to skin these dead birds and turn them into specimens. And yeah, that I guess she allowed me to do that and fueled it, and kind of sacrificed her time, and it was all about taking me there. So
桌上有一包 trial mix，一大包，那是给你的。
yeah, okay, I'm on a video conference. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's really relatable. Yeah, I think like Asian parents, a lot of the times they can be pretty strict, but at the same time, they spend a lot of effort to support our interests and make sure that we can pursue them. Yeah, like you mentioned, the viola classes, the piano classes, and then also like the bird class. I guess like factoring in all the driving time and then also the costs of these classes.
Yeah, yeah, the viola and the piano was not my choice. I didn't want to do that. In fact, I hated it. But although I'm glad that I learned how to do that, because now I can play, and I still play, but I still hated it. But the birds is something that I wanted, and yeah, they facilitated that for sure.
Do they like look at your bird drawings now and like feel proud?
Well, I don't ask them that. I'm sure they feel proud. Well, certainly in the early days, yes, and now of course, I'm sure they feel proud, but they don't say anything. And that's fine with me. I actually don't want them to say anything. It's just a normal thing. Um, it's nothing special, and I think they now it's on my, I'm full grown adult. I do what I do, and whatever I do, that they're okay. They don't think about that. Yeah, of course. I used to, when I was young, meaning like in college and maybe up until the first few years, or first 10 years as a professor, or up to tenure, whenever I had something, some achievement, I would tell them, and they would feel happy. But if I had a paper that I published, yeah, these days I don't. It's like they don't really care if I have another paper. Who cares? I mean, or an award or something. It's not that important. So I don't we don't talk about that anymore. It's an interesting thing. My dad used to, not so much now, because there's just too many now to read. But in the early days, he would read every one of my papers, academic papers, even though it wasn't in the same field. He would read them.
Yeah, so like I guess earlier in the days, how would they express that they're proud of you? Like would they say it verbally or like non-verbally?
Well, I don't think it certainly never verbally. It was sort of just understood, I guess. It wasn't yeah, I don't recall any I mean, because I wasn't very remarkable, so I didn't like win the trophies or anything. So there was nothing to get excited about when I was young. It was just yeah, no, there, I mean, I didn't. I never was first place in anything. So I think the best I had was third place on the swim team. It was great. I was in the breaststroke consistently in third place, which was amazing, given that I'm not quite that athletic. And but what they didn't know was that I was in the heat where there were only three swimmers, so I was always last and third. So it was a pretty good deal for me. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. I guess they were like guaranteed.
Yeah. So that it was always good. Like, Mom, I got third place. Like, oh wow, that's cool. Yeah, but it was always last, but or it seemed to work. Yeah.
Could I also ask, like, are there any specific moments in time that you recall feeling really loved by your parents? Like just specific moments in time?
Well, of course, I've always felt loved and of course still feel loved. So, but there's no specific time. It's just like a steady. I don't think we were ever the type to like shower each other in love and gush. Just we just never did that. But we also never questioned that there wasn't. We wouldn't question anyone's love. It just never occurred to us or my parents or me, and so yeah, it was just accepted. So there's no particular moment of excessive love or a deficit in love.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's a really healthy relationship. That's good. Or like, do you remember a specific happiest moment that you had with them?
Well, I mean, um, uh, you know, my childhood was actually not a great childhood, not related to my parents. It was the the school being sort of beat up every day, so physically and verbally. So um, and so I don't think was a particularly happy kid in general. So uh, so I guess it doesn't take too much to make me happy to escape from that sort of nonsense that was happening at school. So I think I I think the times I remember when I was very young, you know, traveling, we would go out like a camping trip. Those were my best times, mainly as an escape from the real world, the rest of the world. Yeah.
And it's totally fine if you don't want to answer this. But like, were your parents aware of the bullying and like, did they like how did
Well,
they handle that?
they I don't think they were aware in it partly, but I don't think they really understood the sort of level of bullying and racism. I mean, you know, where they grew up, it was a homogeneous society, and so and then English wasn't the first language, so some of the racial slurs they didn't know what they meant, right? So you try to explain to them, but you know, I could send, you know, there's nothing they could do either. What could you do? you can go as a parent, go in and beat up those kids. You couldn't do that either. And so there was really nothing they could do. And I've never really talked to them about this. If they ever felt some sense of helplessness and the ability to help me, it's I think it was tough for them, tough for me and my brother. But I think, and I don't know if this was intentional, but if you're having all this trouble, you can grow up as a kid without, if you fall behind in classes and you're being bullied and beat up. I think many kids don't make it, and it's not just Asian kids or minorities, but you don't make it. And by that I mean you come up pretty screwed up in your head, or worse. And so I think it's very important to build up some confidence, and I think for my case, the confidence certainly wasn't coming from swimming, even though I did get third place, and it certainly wasn't coming from the academics, because I was able to do fine. I was not able to do really well, but the birds, I think my mom recognized that was something that I found myself, became very good at, and there was nobody else doing it, and I could work in that way on my own and build up my own confidence, and in some sense the birds letting me go deep into it, to the point, I mean, I still do it today. It's like my second life. Maybe soon will be my primary career when I retire. That saved my life, I think. And my mom, don't know if she knew that, but kind of fueled that, because she knew that was the only thing that kept me going. So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm really sorry you had to go through that. But
well,
yeah.
it's I think I'm not alone. There are a lot of people that have gone through that, but when I look back, though, for a long time I was just mad and angry that why did I have to go through that, and just sort of really a angry person. But I think I wouldn't go back, since I survived. I guess I wouldn't go back to change that. I think I mostly conquered those things in my mind, and I think it makes me who I am. And from everything the way I was brought up, and the things that happened to me, it shapes who you are. And who I am now is as much it's because of the hardships that I experienced. And so I think a lot of it allows me to feel a little bit more empathetic to people, even to the bulliers, people that bully, because they themselves have problems which makes them bully. So, and I tend not to blame people for their actions, but rather try to find out, what's behind their actions that drives them, that they can't control, that something happening in the house, something happening elsewhere, I don't know, but we're not really fully in control of our behaviors. And so I guess one thing is, and I don't know if this is common in the Asians, but you can imagine, like, you go through with that sort of life, you can go through long periods of sort of depression, sort of almost like to the level of clinical depression, where in an Asian family, it's actually very difficult to accept that. The word doesn't really exist, and it's not because, I mean, it's really a Western thing, because in the Western privileged world, you have all this spare time and to ask yourself, why am I sad? Why am I mad? But when you're just trying to stay alive, you don't have time to think about those sorts of things. So they never did. They came from a poor family back in Taiwan. This, if you were feeling sad, it would be more like, well, stop feeling sad, get up and get yourself together and work or do something. Stop being spoiled. And they never said that, but I don't think they then would understand that. But that each generation changes, and I think my generation, we understand that a little more, and I think that's better. And so there's constant improvement. So they never acknowledged any of that, but they certainly, or they didn't know how to deal with that. But I think my mom making sure that I had something that I could do well on, even if it wasn't related to school. It was the birds. I think that was a very special thing that she did. My dad also, of course, was involved, and yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think when you're in like a dark place, you kind of need like a confidence push, and you need something that you are really good. You are really good.
You need something.
Yeah.
It's all about, I believe that confidence. I see a lot of people, young people, including Rice students, that going through a lot of stuff, and I watch how, as you start to be able to do something on your own, it builds your confidence, and suddenly you become a very different person when you finally have the confidence. So I speak for myself. If you had looked at me back when I was 15 or 16, you would never ever think that I'd be like what I am today, or even I became department chair. You wouldn't think that's something I would even want or even be capable of, because I really had some issues when I was young. So
yeah, and do you kind of pass on that wisdom to your own child? Like, has that kind of informed your own parenting?
yeah, well, he's 8, so of course I don't talk about these deeper level things obviously with him, but I definitely, I'm more of a hands-off type of parent. I just want him to be happy. To me, that's the most important. Just be happy, and that's about it.
No, yeah, I think that's definitely a good parenting goal. You also mentioned kind of the mindset difference between like your generation and your parents' generation, in terms of like mental health. So I also really agree. I think like also the immigrant mentality is kind of just to keep pushing forward. Um, and there isn't really like space, I guess, to talk about mental health when you're just kind of trying to survive.
Yeah.
So how comfortable like were your own parents in kind of expressing and talking about their emotions? Like, did they ever show sadness or like vulnerability around you?
Well, I mean, they would never talk about it. Never once hear them talk about that they're sad or even happy or anything like that. No, it was pretty stable as a ship. But of course, I've seen my mother cry, and seen my dad cry when he uh, told stories of his childhood. So uh, yeah, so I've seen those. Yeah.
And
Each
then
generation is different. If you go back far enough in the generations, the my grandparents, they, this is pretty typical. They probably, if the kid misbehaved, probably beat the hell out of them, male or female. And I think when I was younger, well, my dad and my mom would actually would spank us. That was considered the norm. Even in the U.S., a few generations ago, the teachers would spank you, right? But these days, you wouldn't do a thing like that. But I do remember my mom. It was spank me with a stick. It was called the 棍子, and it would get to the point where she said in Chinese, "Go outside and go get me a stick from a bush or something." Of course, I would go out. I look around. I look and try to inspect all the branches and find the branch that was going to be the least painful. And so I got pretty good at looking at tree branches. So I would get like the weakest one and bring it to my mom, and she'd whack me. So it was experimentation. Sometimes you picked the wrong one and it hurt like hell. And my dad also, he wouldn't use the gunzi. He would just spank the hell out of me. But of course, I don't do that to my kid. It never would even occur to me to do that. But I at the same time, I cannot blame my parents that did something wrong. I mean, today you would, but back then that's the way. But they did it less than their parents, and so these things are passed down generation from generation, and this just takes time to change. They are the old Taiwan way. They came from the countryside, and now in the U.S. is quite different. We broke that tradition, but at the same time, by breaking that tradition, I've also lost contact with my most of my relatives, or at least my connections. I know them, but I don't. We're not close with back in Taiwan, so it's like you have jumped to a different world, and you start a new family, a new lineage here.
Yeah. Do you still retain some like Taiwanese aspects in the way you raise your child, or like in your household, I guess?
Well, I it's hard for me to say that because I'm although I was born in Taiwan, I came very young, and I didn't really have many Taiwanese friends. There were very few Asians around, so it's just with my parents. So I don't know what's Taiwanese, to be honest. But my wife is Taiwanese, and she came much later than I did. So really, her identity was made in Taiwan. My identity was made in the U.S. with Taiwanese parents. So it's a mixture, hybrid. And certainly, her parenting is a little different than mine. Mine is really hands-off, free-range chicken sort of style, and she's more on the discipline side, more a little bit like my mom. So I can see that there, and I'm more just don't get yourself into trouble. That's all, and all be fine.
Yeah, I guess that's a good balance to have. Like one of
Yeah,
each parent, I guess.
yeah. Sometimes we disagree on how to balance that, but yeah.
Yeah, I was also wondering because I know like a lot of Asian parents, or especially like Asian immigrant parents, aren't very big on physical touch, so they won't really like hug their kids too much. Whereas a lot of Western parents, will be more inclined to do that. Obviously, like not this is not like a black and white thing, but just like in general, kind of. Um, Were your parents like comfortable with like physical touch around you?
Well, yeah, sure. Although I don't think it's like we were constantly, hugging, and don't think saw my parents like giving each other kisses or something like that in public or anything, or even at home. So, in that sense, I guess that was pretty stereotypical. So I don't recall much of that. But of course, we hug, but it's not like, yeah, it's more the Asian stereotype. Yes.
I see. And then I also wanted to ask, what is your biggest hope or wish for your parents?
Uh, you know, I don't know. I think I don't really have any. I think I'm happy that they are 80, uh, still in good health, and I think they lived a good life. And what more could you hope for? Could you want? Um, their two kids are still alive, so married. They got grandchildren. They made enough money or saved enough money that they can live comfortably, and that's about the best you can want. And my dad was retired and was able to write his sort of life story, which is actually a very interesting, very interesting story. So he was able to write that, and for him, that actually was important to tell the story of his own dad. So yeah, he accomplished that. So I think they did what they, and they're Americans too, and they think they're Americans. So yeah, my mom made it, raised two kids, and I don't have any more hopes. Just that they did what they the best they could do, and it's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. It seems like they accomplished a lot. So if your parents were to see this interview in the future, is there anything that you'd want to tell them?
Yeah, I hope they don't see this interview.
Just hypothetically.
Well, uh, they did a good job, I guess. It all worked out, despite all the ups and downs. So yeah, it worked out.
Yeah, that's great.
Can't ask for anything more than that. So
So yeah, that's all the questions I have prepared.
okay. Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to add?
No, that's good. Thanks for doing this.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. Or I guess like
Yeah.
over Zoom.